Hello and welcome to another straight to the point After Effects tutorial. In this one, I'm going to be showing you how to replace a screen in After Effects. This one's going to be done slightly different to my other tutorials. I'm going to try something new. I'm going to break this process down into chapters, and we're going to go through each step that I would do if I was doing this on a live job. And I'm going to share with you a few extra things that I do when I'm swapping a screen to make that screen look a little bit more convincing and more real world. This method will work for TVs, monitors, laptops, phones. It's the same process. Importing our footage and setting up. Okay, so first things first, we need to import our footage. You can either drag and drop that into the project menu here, or you can hit Command or Control I and bring up the import menu there. And once that's imported, you can go into the project settings. So if you click down here where it says 16 BPC, and it will come up to show you the color management. For the purposes of this tutorial, this one, we're going to leave this at Adobe Color Managed and the working space as Rec 709. And what we want to do is just make sure that the shots that we brought in conform to that color space. And this will help you further down the line if you need to grade this shot or you need to pass it on to someone else to work with. And you just right click the footage, down to Interpret Footage, Main, and then when this menu pops up, click over to the color tab. And as you can see, it's already in Rec 709. But if you needed to change it, you can click the Override Media Color Space and pick the one you need. Luckily for us, it's already in Rec 709, and because that's the color space we're working in, so we can just OK that, and we'll just do the same. Click on this one, and as you can see up here, it's already in Rec 709. So now that we confirmed that our footage is in the correct color space, we can then start by creating our comp. So if we get the shot, drag it down to the Create Comp icon down here, and that loads up our shot. Tracking the shot. Okay, so we've got our shot ready to go. What we need to do now is we need to track the screen. We're going to use the Mocha Lite version that ships with After Effects as standard. So if we go to Effect, Boris FX Mocha, and Mocha AE. So this is a fairly cut down version of Mocha, but it should do exactly what we need it to do. Okay, so this is the version of Mocha that ships with After Effects. It's very cut down from the Pro version, but it does exactly what we need to do for this tutorial. Okay, right, so what we're going to do, we are going to create a tracking plane for this monitor. And if we click the pen and X icon, that's going to create an X spline, and we're just going to draw a fairly tight mask around this monitor. And you just right click to complete the mask, or it will keep adding points to it. Okay, so Mocha's now going to track that shape. We just want to give it some perspective information. So if you click this big S icon up here, and that gives us this little box. These corners we are going to put to the edges of the screen. So this is the bit where it's going to give us the tracking data for those corners rather than the whole area we've tracked. So we just zoom in there and just make sure that is nice and tight. You can go over a little bit if need be. There's a method later on just to make those edges a little bit tidier. And just pop the other corner down there. And the third corner down here. And the last corner, we're going to stick down here. And we'll just give that a quick look over, just to make sure that nothing has moved. And that looks pretty good. As you can see, as we're looking closely at this shot now, you can see a little bit of reflection. You can see that the green that they've put on the monitor isn't perfectly green. Obviously the way the monitor's being lit and the way reflections are working in that room, we've got kind of like a gradient texture over it. So later on in the tutorial, I'm going to show you a method that I use to take a bit of that information and put it back over the screen that you've replaced, so it looks a bit more natural. Okay, right, so we've got the area selected that we want to track. And then we've pointed out the corners of the screen, and we're just going to go down here into the tracking information and click on perspective, and minimum percentage of pixels used is fine for now. We can always change that if we get any issues with the track. And we're just going to click track forward now and give that a little bit of time, and that will work out the motion of that screen. And hopefully we get it first time. Okay, right, and that looks like a clean track. Let's just put the grid on to see how that is working and just play through. And it looks like that's stuck to that quite nicely, and the perspective looks right. So it looks like we've got a clean track there. What we'll do is we'll save this and go back into our comp. Okay, just click the save button. And then once that's done, you can close Mocha AE. Applying the track. Okay, now that we've done the track, we're going to apply it to the insert layer. Now, what we want to do first is bring in the insert layer. I'm just going to have to tweak that a little bit because I think it's a 4K shot. There's just some generic stock shot I got, and let's shrink that down to 1080, pre-compose that, and call that screen, move all attributes, so that'll take the scale down we've done, put that into the new comp, so that the pre-comp is the same size as the comp we've got now. Right, so we can turn that off for a second, and we can go back into the effects control panel for the plate that we're working on and dial down tracking data in the Mocha plugin. And as we've only got one track in there, we can just click create tracking data. If you go down here, we're going to keep this at corner pin and layer export to screen, and as simple as that, just hit apply export and then turn the screen on, and there we go. That is it, tracked to the screen. We'll play that back through and we'll see how that looks. And that looks pretty good. You could potentially leave it like that, or you could take it further, but the reason why you're here really is because you want to take it further. So next up, color matching and blur. Okay, so two things what we're going to do in this section is we're going to color match the screen insert to the shot we've just put it in, and we're going to add a little bit of blur as well so that the screen insert looks more like it's actually in that shot. So first of all, we're going to do the color match, and I went into this on another tutorial which I will link above. But in a nutshell, what we're going to do is we're going to click on the screen, we're going to go up to Effect, Color Correction and Levels. And this is a little trick I have been using for years, where you just correct each channel individually, so red, green and blue, and you're just basically changing the contrast on a black and white image, which is a lot easier than manually tweaking colors by eye. And this works for 99% of the time. There'll be some shots that you need to do a little bit extra on, but 9 times out of 10 this will do you. Okay, so Alt and 1, or if you want to go down to this option here, you can chip red, green or blue, or RGB if you want to go back to normal. But I always use the shortcut, which is Alt and 1. And you can see which channel you're in because the viewfinder has a color band around it. We've got our levels up and we want to go into the red channel like that. And as you can see, the black looks very, very black. So we're just going to raise them up a little bit. And we'll bring the whites down a little bit so they're not super bright. Alt and 2 to bring up the green channel, and then in the levels effect, go into green. And we're going to do the same thing. As you can see, the black is not as bad as it was with the reds, but the blacks are quite dark there, so we're just going to raise them up a little bit. Just so they look very similar to the surrounding dark shot. And we're going to bring the whites down a little bit as well, so they're not super bright. And Alt and 3 to bring up blue. And with this one, we're actually going to do the opposite. I think we're going to just darken those blacks up a little bit so they don't look too light. And we might bring those whites down a little bit so they're not too bright either. Okay, and moment of truth, hit Alt and 3 or whichever channel you're on, and that'll take you back to RGB mode, and it looks a bit messy there. Looks very green, so we need to change that. Okay, so we can probably darken up the green one a little bit. Let's bring that back down. And it looks like the yellows as well, which is not surprising considering we did a lot of difference on the just turn it on and off to see what the difference is. It's looking okay. Just put a little bit of that back in. Just darken that down. So, and there we go. So, before, after. Looks a bit more natural. You can probably tweak that further, but just for the purpose of this tutorial, that looks pretty good. It doesn't look so, and the problem is with a lot of people when they do screen replacements, they can look very harsh. The edges can look very harsh and the colors can look very harsh. So I try to soften up if I can match the brightest points of both the screen and the background shot as well as the dark points, they usually blend a lot better. Okay, so we're just going to add a little bit of blur now. We don't need a lot, but if you zoom in and look at the pixels around the edge of the screen, they're quite soft and out of focus, whereas what's on the screen is quite sharp. So we don't need a lot, maybe 1 pixel at most, but just that little bit of blur will add a little bit more believability to it. Okay, so if you go up to Effect and then Blur and Sharpen and then Camera Lens Blur, and as you can see, that is overkill. And we don't need anywhere near as much as that, so I'm just going to take that down to 1. See what happens. Maybe even half. I think that's it. Let's do a quick before and after. Maybe 1. There we go. And these are the settings you can spend hours tweaking to whatever you think looks great. For the purposes of this tutorial, this looks pretty good. So that's the color matched and added a little blur so that it looks like it's more in the shot. And to be honest, you could probably leave it there, but if you wanted to take it further, here's how we do it. Creating a screen matte. One thing that can cause issues with screen replacements is the edges. Whether something goes wrong with the track or something goes wrong with the element you're putting in, you can sometimes see the screen behind it. There's a few ways you can get around that. A quick and easy cheat would be, so if we just turn the screen off, go back into the original shot, go into Effect, Keying, Advanced Spill Suppressor, take that down to Ultra, and then get the color picker, go over to the screen, Command or Control, click to, as you can see, the color picker gets thicker, which basically means it takes an average of the pixels in the vicinity. Click that, turn that on, and that'll just give you a grey screen. And that's a lot easier to hide than a bright green screen background. But we're not going to do that. I'm going to get rid of that. And what I'm going to do is make a screen matte, and that's just basically going to be a black and white image of the screen. And we're going to use that as a Luma matte for the screen insert. Sometimes you can have screens where a 4-point corner pin doesn't work because it's got curved edges. Really common on mobile phones. MacBooks have a few weird bezels on their screens, and that can be problematic when swapping screens. So what I would do is I would create a Luma matte. So we're just going to duplicate the base layer, bring that to the top. We'll just call that Luma matte. Because we've duplicated that base layer, we've still got the tracking information from the Mocha plugin. And if we go up there, we can go into matte, and then we're going to create an After Effects mask. and that should bring the mask from the tracking area. So it doesn't bring the tracking information, but these corner points here, it's going to show us just the matte, and that's all we're interested on this one. So if I go down to that, that should just show us that. For this to work, what I need to do is make a black and white image. So I'm going to have to deal with these issues around the edges, the light bits, or actually that may not matter because I don't think our image is going to go past that. I'm just more worried about getting a decent crisp finish on the actual screen itself. So if I go up to Effect, and we can just go to Color Correction, Tint, make it black and white, or grey and black for now. Color Correction again, back into our favorite levels, and we're just going to crush the whites until they're very, 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 very white. And crush the blacks to very, 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 very black. And we'll just tweak this until we get a very good black and white image. And that looks alright. Okay, let's turn that one off a second. And let's get our screen back in. In this example, we've got quite a nice track. We don't really have any issues with seeing the screen underneath or any edging problems. But I'm just going to simulate it now by making the screen a little bit bigger. So if you had any bevels or that you needed to cover. So the screen we've put in now is actually bigger than the screen that is covering. Okay, so I'm just going to set the screen to use this Luma matte as a Luma matte. And as you can see from that, we've got a very, very nice clean edge. And that's the method I would use if I was going to swap a screen on something like a MacBook screen where they've got beveled corners and they've got that little recess where the webcam goes. That'll get you out of trouble on a few things like that. But on these ones, I don't really need to, because I've upscaled it, we do lose a little bit of information there. So I'll just take it back to 100. Okay, and that is how to make a screen matte. As I said, that will get you out of trouble if you've got any weird shapes to the screen that you're replacing. Really common on mobile phones, really common on MacBooks. 9 times out of 10 you don't really need to do that, but if you've got weird shapes, like I say, that will solve that problem. And using the method we've just done, we can take that even further. Preserving the screen texture. Okay, and we've just made the Luma matte. What we're going to do now is we're going to try and preserve some of that screen texture that we saw earlier and add that back in over the screen insert we've done, and it helps sell that screen insert. Okay, right, so we're going to duplicate our Luma matte because it's pretty much the same method we need to do. We'll turn off those effects, turn that on, and right, okay, so what we'll do is we'll set that to use the Luma matte so that we only see the screen. And there's a little bit there that we haven't really got to worry about. If we go to Effect, Color Correction, Tint, make it black and white, or grey in this instance, Effect, Color Correction, and then Levels. And what we'll do is we'll crush that down. Might have to add a little bit of blur because as you can see it's a little bit blocky there, and that's just compression artifacts from the original shot. Okay, so we're just going to blur that down. What we're going to do is we'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then Effect, Blur and Sharpen, Fast Box Blur, and then just drag those pixels up a little bit so that we lose some of that blockiness. And then from there we're going to link those two together, and we are also going to set that to the Luma matte so that it doesn't blur the rest of the shot. Okay, now to the Luma matte 2, which we should probably rename to Screen Text. Always good to keep organized. Nothing worse than opening up a project of a million different layers and no one knows what any of them are. Okay, and we'll go to the blending mode of that. We'll set that to say multiply, unsolo it. Okay, and there we go, but we've got a slight problem there because the adjustment layer is blurring the entire screen, and we don't want that. We just want to blur the effect of the screen texture. So if we take those mattes off, what we want to do is we want to pre-compose that. Let's take a duplicate of the Luma mat and we will set to use that one, and then we'll set these both to use that Luma mat, and we will select them all, right click, pre-compose, move all attributes to, which we don't get the option to change that in this one because we've got so much selected, and then we're going to name that screen texture. Okay, right, so now we should have something we can play around with. So if we set the blending mode of that to multiply and turn that on and off. Okay, in the bottom left corner now we've got a little bit of texture going on, which is great, that's what we want, but we've also got some problems now with the sides of the screen. Sometimes you can get away with that, but we're just gonna make that nice and tidy. So if we go into the screen texture, and we will see what we can do. Okay, so what I might do on this one is just very, very simply draw a mask. Because the screen doesn't move that much, I'm just going to draw a quick mask so that we're only blurring the bits we want to. And we'll make that as tight as we can so we don't get any of the add a position value on that. We'll just quickly animate this mask. Probably get a little bit tighter, can't we? So let's like that. And we can just drag that over like that. And that will probably do it, to be fair. So let's go back into our main one. Let's go back into our main comp and we'll just turn that off. And we can see a little bit of the edges have been tweaked, but it's a lot better. We can drop the opacity down as well, so it's not too overkill. It goes around about 40, 50, whatever looks nice. And now we've got a little bit of difference on that now. We'll just play that back. Let's do that at 100%. We might now be able to just make out a little bit of reflection as she moves. Right, and that looks pretty good, and depending on the type of shot you've got, sometimes you'll have a bit more reflection, or sometimes you'll have a bit more, you know, maybe you're reflecting on the lights or you're reflecting the user of the laptop. You can bring that in a little bit and it helps it look a lot more natural. And that's that for creating a screen texture. And there's one more thing we can do to make that sell a little bit more. We probably don't need to do it with this particular shot. With some stuff like, let's say for instance this, it's an imported motion graphic that I found on Envato. The shot itself has got camera grain in it, but the motion graphic doesn't. And it's probably not that noticeable on this particular instance, but what we can do now is we can create a grain mat to add the grain from the shot we've imported and put that over the screen insert, and again it helps it look more natural and sell the shot as a whole. If you're just doing this for YouTube, you're probably not going to need to go that far, but if you want to go a little bit further, here we go. Creating a grain mat. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to create and apply a grain mat. So if we go back to our original shot, we're going to right click that, pre-compose, call it plate, and then we're going to go into that. And first things first, we need to remove the grain from this shot. If we go to effect, and Neat Video. I use Neat Video all the time. I think it's a really good plugin. There are other noise reduction plugins out there. I don't get paid to say this about Neat Video, but I really do like it and I find it really easy to use. So if we open Neat Video, if you've got Neat Video, you can follow along. But what I'm going to do now is just create a selection for it to take a noise sample. And we just need to find a decent enough selection that is uniform. That'll do for the purposes of this tutorial. Hit apply, and here is the plate with the noise removed. You're probably not even going to see that much difference, to be fair, because it's not particularly a noisy shot. If we go down here and turn up the brightness, we might see a tiny change. Just click that back to go to normal. Now we've removed the grain from the entire comp. So the motion graphic insert doesn't have any noise on it, and now the plate itself doesn't have any noise on it. And what we're going to do now is we are going to create a matte of the grain. I do cover this in another tutorial, which you can click on the link above. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our project menu, and then where it says plate, we're going to Command D and duplicate that. I believe it's Control D on Windows. Hit return and call that grain matte. Open that up, probably delete the screen from there, duplicate that shot, and as simple as that, turn off reduce noise. And in blending mode, we are going to subtract. So what we've got here is two shots. The same shot, but there's only one tiny difference. The bottom shot has had the grain removed from it. The top one hasn't. So what we're going to do is we're going to set one to subtract from the other. So if you subtract the pixels, the only thing that's going to be different between those two is the grain, and that's in theory what we're going to be left behind with. And at the moment we can't see a thing because it's just black. So if we ramp up the brightness and zoom in, we can start to see some of the noise that we removed. And due to the compression that was used, I'm assuming this was ProRes. You can see the type of compression that's been used. If this was so like an ARRI camera, or you were working directly with the brushes, you'll see it more as a grain pattern rather than blocky compression artifacts. Okay, right, we can click that to go back to normal, but that proves that we've got a matte of the grain. Let's go back into our comp and then up to the project menu, and we're going to grab the grain matte, throw that over the top, and then so we've subtracted, and now we're going to add that back in. And like I said, we're probably not going to see much of a difference on this shot. We can ramp up the brightness, we can put that back to normal, we can off, on, and because it's not really a noisy shot, we're probably not going to make much of a difference on this. But if you are doing something for, say, like the big screen, or if you're working with directly with rushes, and this works wonders for taking the grain from a shot and putting it onto anything you've inserted, whether you've put text into a shot, or whether you, like this, you're replacing a screen or any other elements. Say you need to paint out a wall, and you want to take the noise from that shot and put that over the bit that you've painted over. Okay, so there you have it. That's how to swap a screen in After Effects. Like I said earlier, this method works for any screen, whether you are swapping a mobile phone, a tablet, a big screen, or just a laptop. This is the method I've been using for years to help sell a screen replacement. You can tweak a lot of the settings to your heart's content. Keep tweaking, keep experimenting, and keep learning. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you found this tutorial useful. These tutorials are designed to be as easy as possible for people to pick up and follow on. I'm trying something new with this episode where I've broken it down into chapters because it's easier to record and it's also easier to follow along. Let me know if this format works. If it does, I'll keep at it. Let me know if you prefer the shorter form stuff or you actually prefer the follow along, start to finish projects. As always, keep practicing and keep learning.